The year was 371 BC, and across the Greek world, whispers of an impossible dream echoed through marble halls and dusty training grounds. For 3 centuries, one name had struck terror into the hearts of enemies and inspired awe in allies: Sparta. The crimson-cloaked warriors who had held Thermopylae, who had crushed Athens, who had never known defeat in open battle, seemed as eternal as the mountains themselves. But on a scorching summer day in the hills of Boeotia, everything would change. What you're about to witness isn't just the story of a single battle. This is the moment when the greatest military machine in human history met its match, when tactical genius collided with centuries of tradition, and when one brilliant commander rewrote the rules of warfare forever. The Battle of Leuctra didn't just end Spartan dominance, it shattered the very foundations of Greek power and set in motion events that would reshape the ancient world. Today, we're diving deep into the blood-soaked fields where legends died and heroes were born. We'll uncover how our outnumbered Theban force achieved the impossible, why the Spartan war machine finally cracked after 300 years of victory, and how one man's revolutionary tactics changed military strategy for all time. But to understand the magnitude of what happened at Leuctra, we first need to grasp just how invincible Sparta had become. Picture this. For over 3 centuries, no enemy force had defeated a Spartan phalanx in pitched battle. 300 years of unbroken victory. Children across Greece grew up hearing stories of Spartan warriors who would rather die than retreat, of bronze-tipped spears that never missed their mark, of the crimson tide that swept across battlefields, leaving only victory in its wake. This wasn't just military supremacy, it was psychological warfare on a massive scale. The Spartan military system was unlike anything the world had ever seen. While other Greek cities treated warfare as a seasonal occupation, Sparta had transformed it into a way of life. From the age of 7, Spartan boys were ripped from their families and thrown into the brutal training program known as the Agoge. For 13 years, they endured systematic torture designed to forge them into the perfect killing machines. They were starved to teach them cunning, beaten to build pain tolerance, and forced to sleep on beds of reeds to toughen their bodies. By the time these warriors reached adulthood, they had become something beyond human, living weapons forged in the fires of systematic brutality. They knew no fear because fear had been beaten out of them. They understood no retreat because retreat meant death. The Spartan phalanx wasn't just a military formation, it was a wall of bronze and flesh that had never been broken. But the true genius of Spartan warfare lay not just in individual warrior quality, but in their revolutionary tactical innovations. The phalanx formation they perfected was a masterpiece of ancient military engineering. Picture 8 rows of heavily armored warriors, each man carrying a massive bronze-faced shield called a hoplon and wielding a 9-foot spear called a dory. When these men locked shields and lowered spears, they became an impenetrable wall of death that could crush any opposition. The psychological impact was devastating. Enemy soldiers would see this bronze wave approaching, hear the rhythmic pounding of shields against armor, and many would break and run before the battle even began. Those brave enough to stand their ground found themselves facing warriors who had spent their entire lives preparing for this single moment. The Spartan battle cry, "Come back with your shield or on it," wasn't just bravado, it was a promise. By 371 BC, Sparta's dominance seemed absolute and eternal. They had crushed Athens in the devastating Peloponnesian War, reducing the birthplace of democracy to a shadow of its former glory. Persian gold and Spartan steel had combined to bring the mighty Athenian Empire to its knees. The Spartan navy ruled the seas while their armies dominated the land. From the mountains of Macedonia to the shores of Asia Minor, Spartan power was acknowledged as supreme. But power creates enemies, and Sparta's brutal hegemony had bred resentment across that had once celebrated Spartan victories the Greek world. Cities now chafed under Spartan occupation. The very success that had made Sparta invincible was also sowing the seeds of its destruction. In the northern city of Thebes, a new generation of leaders was studying Spartan tactics with deadly purpose. Thebes had always existed in Sparta's shadow. While Sparta produced warriors, Thebes produced farmers and merchants. While Spartan boys learned to kill, Theban children learned to read and write. The contrast couldn't have been starker, and for decades it seemed to prove Spartan superiority. But beneath the surface, something extraordinary was happening in Thebes that would change everything. The man who would challenge 3 centuries of Spartan supremacy was named Epaminondas, and he represented everything Sparta despised. He was a philosopher, a musician, a lover of poetry and mathematics. In Spartan eyes, he was soft, weak, corrupted by learning and intellectual pursuits. What they failed to understand was that this gentle scholar possessed one of the most brilliant military minds in human history. Epaminondas had spent years studying Spartan tactics, not from the perspective of a defeated enemy, but with the cold, analytical gaze of a mathematician solving an equation. He understood that the Spartan phalanx was indeed nearly invincible when used according to traditional Greek warfare, but what if someone changed the rules entirely? The opportunity came in 371 BC, when tensions between Sparta and Thebes finally erupted into open warfare. King Cleombrotus of Sparta marched north with 10,000 warriors, confident that another routine campaign would crush Theban resistance once and for all. The Spartan king had every reason for confidence. His army included 4,000 full Spartan citizens, the elite warrior class that had never known defeat, supported by allied troops from across the Peloponnese. When news reached Thebes that this massive force was approaching, panic swept through the city. The Theban assembly met in emergency session, and many voices called for immediate surrender. How could their citizen soldiers hope to face the legendary Spartan war machine? But Epaminondas stood before his countrymen and spoke words that would echo through history. The strength of Sparta was also its weakness, and he would prove it on the battlefield. The two armies met on the plain of Leuctra, a stretch of rolling farmland that would soon be soaked with blood. From the Spartan camp came the sound of grinding bronze as warriors prepared their equipment with practiced efficiency. These men had performed these same rituals hundreds of times before, in battles from Sicily to Asia Minor. Victory was so certain that King Cleombrotus barely bothered to scout the enemy positions. But in the Theban camp, something unprecedented was happening. Epaminondas was arranging his forces in a formation that violated every principle of Greek warfare. Instead of the traditional even line, he was creating a massive column on his left wing, 50 men deep instead of the usual 8. His best troops, the elite Sacred Band, would anchor this revolutionary formation. The Sacred Band deserves special mention, for they represented everything noble about Greek warfare. These were 300 warriors bound together not just by military discipline, but by bonds of love. Each man fought beside his beloved companion, knowing that death was preferable to showing cowardice before the one he cherished most. They had never been defeated in battle, and their courage was legendary even among the battle-hardened Greeks. As dawn broke on that fateful July morning, the two armies faced each other across the plain. On one side stood the crimson tide of Spartan shields, arranged in perfect formation, their bronze surfaces gleaming like mirrors in the early sunlight. The sight had struck terror into enemies for 3 centuries, and today seemed no different. On the other side, the Thebans appeared almost amateur by comparison. Their formation looked wrong, unbalanced, as if arranged by someone who didn't understand the basic principles of warfare. King Cleombrotus surveyed the enemy line and smiled. These Thebans would learn the same lesson that so many others had learned before them. The Spartan war machine would roll over them like a bronze avalanche, and by sunset, Theban resistance would be nothing but a memory. He gave the signal, and 10,000 warriors began their advance across the plain, their spears glinting like a forest of bronze death. But Epaminondas wasn't trembling as he watched the legendary Spartan phalanx approach. Instead, he was calculating distances, timing, angles of attack. Everything depended on the next few minutes. 3 centuries of Spartan invincibility were about to collide with the most revolutionary tactical innovation in military history. The moment of contact arrived with thunderous force. Across the dusty plain of Leuctra, 20,000 warriors crashed together in a symphony of bronze and screaming steel. The initial collision sent shockwaves through both armies as shield, met shield, and spear found flesh. For the first time in living memory, the Spartan advance had met genuine resistance instead of crumbling opposition. What happened next defied everything the Greeks understood about warfare. Instead of the traditional pushing match between evenly matched phalanxes, Epaminondas unleashed his masterstroke. The massive 50-deep column on the Theban left wing smashed into the Spartan right with the force of a battering ram against parchment. The weight of numbers, concentrated at a single point, began to buckle the legendary Spartan line. King Cleombrotus, positioned in the place of honor on the Spartan right, found himself facing not the usual 8 ranks of enemy spears, but an impossible wall of bronze 50 men deep. The mathematical reality was devastating. For every Spartan warrior in the front rank, more than 6 Theban spears were aimed at his body. The king himself fell within minutes, a dozen wounds marking his bronze corselet as he collapsed beneath the Theban onslaught. The psychological impact was immediate and catastrophic. For 3 centuries, Spartan warriors had advanced, knowing that their king led from the front, that their formation was unbreakable, that victory was inevitable. Now their monarch lay bleeding in the dust, while enemy spears pressed deeper into their collapsing line. The impossible was happening. Spartans were being pushed backward, but the true genius of Epaminondas revealed itself in what he didn't do. While his left wing hammered the Spartan right into submission, he deliberately held back his center and right wing. This wasn't cowardice. It was calculated brilliance. By refusing battle on 2/3 of the line, he prevented the Spartans from using their superior numbers effectively. The battle became a localized contest where Theban concentration could overcome Spartan quality. The sacred band fought like men possessed, each warrior determined to prove worthy of his beloved companion fighting beside him. Their bronze spears found gaps in Spartan armor with deadly precision, while their shields locked together in an impenetrable wall. These weren't just soldiers, they were lovers fighting for each other's honor, and their fury was terrible to behold. As the Spartan right wing crumbled under impossible pressure, panic began spreading through their ranks like wildfire. Warriors who had never experienced defeat suddenly found themselves stumbling backward, their perfect formation dissolving into chaos. The bronze wall that had terrorized enemies for centuries was breaking apart, and with it, the myth of Spartan invincibility. The collapse accelerated with horrifying speed. Once the first Spartans began retreating, the psychological dam burst completely. Warriors who had been raised to believe retreat meant death found themselves running for their lives. The sight of fleeing Spartans, something no living Greek had ever witnessed, sent shockwaves through the allied troops supporting them. Within an hour of the initial contact, the unthinkable had occurred. The Spartan army was in full flight, leaving behind hundreds of their finest warriors, including their king. The bronze tide that had swept across battlefields for 3 centuries had finally met its match. On the blood-soaked fields of Leuctra, military history had been rewritten by a philosopher who understood that intelligence could triumph over tradition. The immediate aftermath was chaos beyond description. Spartan survivors stumbled southward in scattered groups, many having abandoned their heavy shields to flee more quickly. For warriors raised to believe that losing one's shield was the ultimate dishonor, this mass abandonment represented psychological collapse as much as military defeat. The men limping home were broken. News of the catastrophe spread across not just in body but in spirit. Greece with stunning speed. In Athens, crowds gathered in the agora to hear breathless messengers confirm the impossible. Sparta had been defeated in open battle. In Corinth, allied cities that had served Spartan interests for decades suddenly began questioning their allegiances. From Macedonia to Crete, the Greek world struggled to comprehend a reality where Spartan power was no longer absolute. But perhaps nowhere was the shock greater than in Sparta itself. When the first survivors reached the city with news of defeat, many citizens simply refused to believe it. How could their invincible warriors have fallen to mere Thebans? The mothers and wives who had sent their sons and husbands to war with the traditional farewell, "Come back with your shield or on it," now faced the unthinkable reality that many had returned with neither shield nor honor. The political implications were staggering. For decades, Spartan foreign policy had rested on the simple principle that their military superiority made negotiation unnecessary. Cities obeyed Spartan commands, not from love, but from fear of the bronze-clad warriors who enforced those commands. Now that fear was evaporating like morning mist, and with it, the entire structure of Spartan hegemony. The echoes of that July afternoon still reverberate through military academies across the world, where officers study Epaminondas' revolutionary tactics that shattered 3 centuries of unbroken dominance. At Leuctra, we witnessed more than just another ancient battle. We saw the moment when intellectual brilliance proved that even the most seemingly invincible systems contain the seeds of their own destruction. The crimson shields that had terrorized the Greek world for generations lay scattered in the dust, testament to the truth that no empire, no matter how powerful, remains eternal. In the end, Sparta's greatest strength, their unwavering adherence to tradition, became their fatal weakness when confronted by a mind willing to rewrite the rules of war itself.